Ever pour your heart and soul into a project only to have someone come in, with a list of changes, things you got to change?
Uh-huh.
That's kind of what we're diving into today.
Okay.
The whole world of film censorship and one director's passionate pushback against it.
Right.
So we've got this open letter, right?
Yeah.
It's from Pawan Kumar.
Okay.
He's the filmmaker behind this Canada film, Lifeu, Ishtene.
Mm-hmm.
And he's writing to this Mr. Nagaraj, who's a regional head of the CBFC.
Okay.
And that's basically like the gatekeepers for movies in India, right?
Yeah.
Deciding what people can and can't see.
It's a big job.
Yeah, it is. And Prawn, let me tell you, he does not hold back.
Oh, really?
No, he's not shy at all about sharing how he feels about this whole thing.
I can imagine that's a frustrating position to be in.
Absolutely. But before we really get into it, can you give us just a little bit of background on film certification boards?
Yeah.
Especially, in a place like India, so diverse, so culturally rich.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What's that like? What kind of tightrope are they walking?
Oh, absolutely. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
You're trying to balance protecting cultural sensitivities, right?
Yeah.
But then you want to also celebrate artistic expression.
Yeah.
It's a very delicate dance, let me tell you.
I bet.
And film certification boards, that's their job. That's what they're tasked with.
Yeah.
And they get it from both sides, believe me.
How about
They're
that?
always in the hot seat.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
So Paul and Kumar's letter, it throws us right into the fire, right into the thick of it.
Okay.
He starts with this, it's almost comical, this anecdote about the tagline for his film.
Let's go. Move on, sucker.
Move on, sucker.
Sounds pretty harmless, right?
Yeah,
You'd think so.
I don't see the big deal.
But the CBFC, they took issue with sucker.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
It's just, you think about it, it's kind of ironic, right?
Yeah.
He's got to fight tooth and nail to keep this, relatively tame word.
Right.
And then you've got these bigger budget films that seem to get away with way more. He even calls out Delhi Belly.
Delhi Belly.
Yeah, and that song Padmavathi as examples. Interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is where it gets really complicated, right?
Hmm.
Censorship.
Yeah.
Language is always evolving.
Right.
What might be offensive today might be totally fine tomorrow,
Totally.
And these boards, they have to keep up with that.
But they can't stifle creativity at the same time.
Right.
It's a tough job, really.
It's a tough line to walk, I can imagine.
It really is. And you bring up a good point. How can one word like sucker be a problem in one film but not another?
Exactly.
And that often comes down to what they think the impact on the audience will be.
Interesting.
What's the cultural background? What's the intent of the filmmaker? Even just the overall tone of the movie.
Right.
They look at all of that. And it can be inconsistent. It really can.
It sounds like trying to, one of those impossible things, like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall or something.
Exactly. Exactly.
And speaking of tricky situations, Pawan Kumar, in this letter, he also talks about this other scene. And it involves a condom. And what makes it even more, I think, interesting or kind of strange is that he's saying, look, I'm trying to promote safe sex here. This is like public health campaigns.
Right.
But the CBSC, they flagged it, said it might be inappropriate.
Huh.
Which, to me, feels like a missed opportunity to have a really important conversation.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's definitely a point of tension there. I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with, how to portray these things responsibly. What one culture says is educational, another one might think is totally taboo.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is especially true, I think, in a place like India with so many different cultural norms.
Of course.
Trying to navigate all of that. I mean, it's complicated.
It's got to be so tough.
And it leads to a lot of debate.
Oh, I bet.
A lot of heated conversation.
Yeah, for sure. It's like they want to just, sweep it under the rug instead of actually dealing with it.
All right.
And this whole thing's like this inconsistency. It comes up again in the letter when he's talking about a scene with a woman smoking.
Okay.
It got flagged by the censors.
Right.
But then he's like, but wait a minute, what about all the graphic violence,
I see.
that seems to get through all the time?
Yeah, it makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does.
About what we choose to focus on.
Yeah. What are we saying is okay and what isn't?
Exactly. Different cultures have different ideas about these things.
That's true.
Historically, yeah, women smoking, it's been a big no-no in a lot of places.
Interesting.
And I think you see that reflected sometimes in how seriously they take it compared to something like violence, unfortunately.
It's almost like violence is just, part of life.
Yeah, which is a whole other issue, right?
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, it's a whole conversation.
Exactly.
But okay, so we've got the smoking thing.
Right.
And then it gets even better because then there's this lip-to-lip kissing scene,
Okay.
which, again, flagged.
Really?
And he's pointing out, look, there are other movies, even movies for younger people, that have way more suggestive stuff.
Yeah, where do you draw the line?
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking is like, where's the line? What's too far?
And who decides, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like there's not really a clear answer.
It's tricky. It really is. I mean, so much of it is subjective.
Yeah.
What I think is fine and you might be totally uncomfortable with,
Right.
and vice versa. So these boards, they're trying to interpret these guidelines, and it's not always so clear-cut.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster, almost.
It can be. It can be. It definitely leads to some head-scratching moments for sure.
I bet. So what do you think? I mean, is there a way to make it better? Can we make these guidelines more objective?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, it all comes back to this balance, right? Protecting people, but also protecting art.
Yeah.
One thing I've always thought is maybe you need more voices in the room.
Okay, like what do you mean?
So it's not just, the censors, get filmmakers in there,
Okay.
cultural experts, maybe even psychologists.
Interesting.
People who can offer different perspectives, a more well-rounded view,
I like it. Like a censorship roundtable.
Exactly. Get everyone at the table.
I love it.
Have a real discussion.
Yeah.
I think that would solve a lot of problems.
All right, because it takes away that like one-sidedness. Is not just coming from one perspective.
Exactly.
That's awesome. But I think one thing that really comes through in this letter from Pawan Kumar
Yeah.
is this frustration.
Oh, I bet.
Like he feels like he's being held to a different standard.
And I can only imagine, especially as part of a smaller film industry, like the Canada film industry.
Exactly. And he even talks about the money part of it,
I'm sure.
having to make these changes. It's not cheap.
No, it's definitely a financial burden, and it's something that people don't always think about. Censorship, even if it's well-intentioned, it has real-world consequences. It can stifle creativity. It can silence voices, especially voices from marginalized communities.
It's like they don't even get a chance.
Exactly. They don't even get a chance to be heard.
That's really sad.
It is. It is.
And it's interesting because he goes on to say, I don't think Mr. Nagaraj is a bad guy.
Okay.
He's like, I don't think he's corrupt.
Interesting.
He thinks it might be an ego thing.
Oh, okay.
Like, here's this person in a position of power.
Right.
Maybe he's just disconnected.
From the reality of it all, yeah.
Yeah. Like, he doesn't really get what it's like to be a filmmaker.
I can see that. It's like that dynamic you see sometimes.
Yeah.
Between, like, a teacher and a student.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But obviously with much higher stakes.
Oh, yeah, way higher stakes.
This is their livelihood we're talking about.
Exactly. This is their art. This is their passion.
Absolutely. And I think when you have that power imbalance, it's easy for things to get, a little skewed.
Out of whack, yeah.
Decisions are made based on personal feelings, not necessarily because it's the right thing to do.
That's a really good point.
And it's not just in film.
Oh, yeah.
Look at publishing, look at music, even the art world.
Oh, I'm sure it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Wow, that's a lot to think about.
It really is.
It's like that saying, art imitates life.
Right.
But this is more like, I don't know, life imitating art, imitating life.
Yeah, it's all a bit muddled, isn't it?
Totally. But I think the point is, when we really look at this letter, it's so much bigger than just a few cuts in a film.
Oh, absolutely. This is about, the battle between creative freedom and censorship. And that's something that's been going on forever.
Right. And it's everywhere, not just in film.
Exactly. It's everywhere.
But I think Pawan Kumar's letter, it gives us this really interesting look at how it all actually works.
Yeah, behind the curtain. Yeah.
Like the nitty-gritty,
And what it does to artists, how it impacts them.
Exactly. It's not just this abstract idea. It has real consequences.
It really does. And it makes you ask, who gets to decide?
Right. Who has that power?
Who gets to say what we can and can't watch, listen to, read?
It's a big question.
It's a huge question, and it's something that I think we all have to think about.
I totally agree. And one thing I really loved about this letter, you can just feel the passion, Like, you can tell how much Pawan Kumar cares about this, about making art, about telling stories that are true to him, even if it makes some people uncomfortable.
It's inspiring.
It really is. And it
Mhm.
makes this whole conversation so important.
It is. It reminds us that there are real people behind these decisions, real lives.
Yeah.
And we need to be having these conversations, talking about censorship, about what it means, how it's changing, especially now with streaming and everything.
Right. It's a whole new world, isn't it?
It really is. Like, can these old ways of doing things even keep up?
That's a good question. It's like trying to put a genie back in the bottle.
Exactly. Once it's out there, it's out there.
Right. So as we're, heading into this new world of content,
Mhm.
what's one thing, what's like a big takeaway you would want our listeners to remember from all of this?
I think for me, it's the power of talking to each other, you know?
Okay, like open dialogue.
Exactly. Pawan Kumar wrote this letter.
Right.
It started this whole conversation.
Yeah, and look at us. We're still talking about it.
Exactly. And that's how we make progress.
I love that.
By listening to each other, trying to see things from different perspectives, maybe we can figure out how to protect artists and art.
I love that. On that note, I think that's a wrap for us.
Sounds good.
Listeners, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this gave you a lot to think about when it comes to censorship, creativity, and using your voice to make a difference.